The most important piece of advice that if you're doing this is that everyone skips is take the time to create the criteria by which what would make a good name for you.
Hmm.
So, like spelling and pronunciation should be on the list for probably every name. Like very few people want to come across a business name. Like if you don't know how to pronounce it, generally you're not going to say it. It's just like because no one wants to look stupid. It's like just
Hmm.
human nature. And
Hmm.
so that was something almost every business should think about: spelling and pronunciation, available URL. Do social
Yep.
handles matter? Again, like what are the values you want to stand for? Does the name sound like it's in line with those values? Is it memorable? Does it sound like an industry fit?
I've been to the school of thought on both of these perspectives, which is on one end of the spectrum, the name doesn't matter. Just come up with something cool and then build, or that you like, and then build a brand around it. And then the other end of the spectrum, which is like, this is the most important decision you're going to make as a business owner, right? So maybe give us your perspective on that. And let's start right there, because I'd like for our listeners to understand if they're in that position, whether they're either considering a rebrand or starting a business, or maybe having a specific, I mean, then maybe there's some other cases that you can kind of educate on where this is really important.
Yeah, there. The first distinction I would make would be between renaming something and a new name. So if you're renaming an organization, I would say the biggest thing you want to be thinking about is how to create a name that represents the culture that already exists and that's vibrant. If you're renaming something, of course, there are some like crisis rename situations, but most of the time you're renaming something because it's been successful and you want to figure out how to grow. So that's the first thing we think about is how can we get to know a culture as quickly as possible and create things that are really in line with that. Because if you can create things that feel like extensions of the people, that's where you get really interesting, cool combinations and cool ideas. If you're thinking of a new name, there's no baggage yet. So the biggest issue is there are just, I don't know the stats, but there are however many businesses created every day, lots. And so a big issue facing any kind of new entrepreneur is that trademark problem and the idea of how do you own your IP. So any kind of English word is generally going to be taken to some degree in almost every industry. And so then you're starting to think about how do you create compounds of English words like Facebook, or kind of overlap words like where Pinterest takes pin and interest and overlaps a syllable, and you can kind of create interesting names that way. Or taking a word and twisting it a little so it's like instead of pillow maybe it's Zillow, those sorts of kind of twists that kind of create new things. So I do think, for there are two, it comes down to, ultimately it comes down to strategy, and it depends where you are. If you're in a field where novelty or innovation is prized, then I would think pretty seriously about a name that sounds and feels like pretty weird on day one, because, people are going to be like intrigued and you're going to get to fill it with meaning and it's going to be interesting. If you're in an industry where trust, tradition, history, those sorts of things are, if you're starting like a wealth management firm, for example, you may want it to sound pretty established. You probably don't want it to sound like Bizarro. And that probably makes a lot of sense. So, and there are still interesting things out there. Just create, there are ways to kind of create combinations that feel familiar. So I think I answered yes when you asked me a question, this or that. But I think what the big bottom line is, it comes down to business strategy and what industry you're in. Because a name, like, no one really cares about names at the end of the day. It's just like how do they how do they give you momentum for accomplishing your business goals?
All right, so I think I am in the same camp that you're describing, which is like what is the strategy,
Yep.
and does the name serve or detract from our objectives here? And that's probably where you find its importance. And I think about, I love the example you give, just like a wealth management firm. Like you're not going to come up with, at least in my view, I wouldn't recommend coming up with like one of those quirky made up terms for something like that. I also, this kills me when I see this stuff. It's like, at least don't hurt yourself with your name, right?
Yep.
I saw there was a restaurant recent that we like passed by and I looked it up on Yelp, and it actually had really good reviews on Yelp. It was a really nice restaurant, but the name of it was something like Mouse in the House, or something, right, like something that had a really off-putting, it's like that's not the thing I want to think about. Now that's a silly example, restaurant, but I think brands do this a lot with their business as well. Sometimes if it's like really long or if it's hard to spell. I mean, being in the digital space, it's not as important these days if it's like an easy thing to type into Google, but let's not make it extremely hard for people, right? And let's not make it something that's so convoluted and difficult to actually remember and hold on to. That's the advice that I tend to give. Now, where I might go, an inch deep into this topic, you clearly are going a mile deep into this. And so this is where I will say, this is where I tend to defer to the experts, but that's my, my quick advice that I give to people most of the time. Is that fair to say we're sort of on the same page there?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the most important piece of advice that if you're doing this is that everyone skips is take the time to create the criteria by which what would make a good name for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, like spelling and pronunciation should be on the list for probably every name. Like very few people want to come across a business name. Like if you don't know how to pronounce it, generally you're not going to say it. It's just like, because no one wants to look stupid. It's like just human nature. And so that was something almost every business should think about: spelling and pronunciation, available URL. Do social handles matter? Again, like what are the values you want to stand for? Does the name sound like it's in line with those values? Is it memorable? Does it sound like an industry fit? Like again, to the example of wealth management, like Skype would be a weird name for a wealth manager. You'd be like, Skype. I mean, I want like something and Sons or what? I don't know. I don't know. I want someone that's not been screwing this up for like 200 years would be the best.
Something with the word oak in it.
Yeah. Where are the tree metaphors?
Yeah.
So yeah, the big point is take the time to create the criteria. Do you want to like stand in with your industry, or do you want to stand out from your industry? And if you want to stand out from your industry, you have to know what the industry sounds like. So create a spreadsheet. What does it sound like? What are the trends? It's not that hard. Nothing's like super complicated, but it does take a little bit of legwork, because I think the tendency and like the story we have that we get is like, oh, I was just like sitting there and then it hit me. And like that never happens. Like I literally do this for a living all the time, and that has never happened once. And so it's like you get good ideas by putting in the hard work. And so, yeah, take the time. What's the criteria? Generate a ton of names, decide what name fits best against that criteria. And then there's probably the last filter I would say is, I used to say like, as a founder, your opinion doesn't matter, but I'm probably wrong about that. Because I do think, you're the one that says it forever. 100, like you say it, we'll say it more in your life than anyone else will ever read it, think about it. And so if you hate it, it's probably not the best choice because you're going to say it a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's so true. And to be honest with you, I would add to that, can you see yourself saying it 1,000 times to other people, right? I mean, are you comfortable, and can you spit it out, right? Can you state it effectively? Because you are going to have to pitch that thing 1,000,000 times in your career. You're going to have to use that word, that phrase, whatever it is. So that's good advice. Hey, I've got another, this is sort of a connected, you mentioned this, making sure the domain name is available. How important is that? Because I know historically we've always advised people, make sure that your company name is available. Well, that's tougher and tougher to do these days, as I'm sure you've experienced. And, you may have also noticed this new-ish trend where they're just adding words, kind of simple words to the URL. For example, like there was a really great one. I won't use their exact example, but let's say the company name was, let's Bullhorn is the name of your agency, right? Yep. It would be, they'd put like, yes, Bullhorn, or gobullhorn.com or something like that. Yep. Are you seeing a lot of that? And is that something you advise, or are you against that? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, my thought is just that you should think about it and have an opinion on what you want it to be. Like, I mean, I don't really care what the URL is. People will find you if they want to find you, if you put good content out. So go Bullhorn, Team Bullhorn, bullhorn.io, bullhorn.us. I don't care, whatever it is. But some people do care a lot, and they feel really strongly that it has to be like a short.com. And if that's your criteria, that's fine. You just have to prepare yourself for, a 6-figure
Yeah.
buy of the the
Hmm.
URL. Or I'm not sure. It's not necessarily always that expensive, and sometimes it's much more expensive. So my point really was just that you should think about it. What can you live with, and what do you want? Is it okay to have like a phrase? Because I think a phrase, as long as it's like something that someone could say, because again, you're going to have to say it so many times.
Yeah.
So if it's like gobullhorn.com, like that's pretty easy, so I
Hmm.
think something like that would be great.
No, I'm glad to hear you say that. I would have, or I've given the same advice, right? Is that it doesn't matter as much as it used to. Make sure that you're comfortable with what it is. Make sure it's simple enough to say a bunch. So that, I mean, that's really good to hear because I think we're clearly in sort of a new era. And getting into the weeds like this, I know this is not a typical conversation that one might hear like in a podcast, and I think that's okay because these are questions that people really have. I know this because I've talked to 1,000 of them, right? Of would-be founders or new founders or even those looking for a rebrand. They've got a lot of these really specific questions about this topic exactly. That's why I was so glad to have you on because I think this is a good opportunity to answer those. So, guys, the couple of them that we've already hit on is the name. And I would say the main takeaway was make sure you are comfortable saying it a million times and make sure it's not totally off-putting to your audience. And then as far as the URL is concerned, make sure it's something simple enough to explain, but also don't overthink that because what matters more is how memorable and useful your brand and your content is. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
think about, again, I think to URLs and how they relate to your social handles too. It
Yeah.
might be more important for you to have a longer URL if it matches your social handles, just so that
Sure.
everything's consistent. So it's like they consider your entire kind of digital ecosystem.
Okay, so you are in favor of that, making sure that the social handles and your URL match.
I mean, it's just a lot easier. It makes your
Yeah.
life easier when you explain to everybody. It's like we're at Bullhorn Creative everywhere on the internet. Like if you can say that, it's just like saves you a lot of trouble.
No, I
Whether it
agree.
ultimately
Yeah.
matters or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, really. Yeah. It's and you mentioned that's such a good point. That's such a good point that you make because there are so many things that we wrestle with and we as marketers and as, strategists, whatever you want to say our title is on a day-to-day basis, we are bringing the very best that our experience and that the research and data that we can find allows us to, right? So much of this is like, hey, based on all that, this is what we might recommend. But you know what? Your situation very well could be different, which
Yeah.
which is a gift and a curse because it makes us sound like sometimes we're saying it depends to everything, which I hate doing. But that I think is there's a freedom to that provides some liberty to say, look, if we build a good enough strategy, you can overcome some imperfections or some not quite up to best practices tactics that you're taking. So I think it's actually more encouraging than it is frustrating or overwhelming. So let's transition a little bit if we can, Brad. So you and I are both agency guys. We're both, I'd say marketing and branding guys, and at least we fit under the same umbrella. So I kind of want to talk shop a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's, if we can, talk content for a minute. What are you guys doing? What have you experimented with? What's worked really well for you guys, either for you and your business or for clients that you've worked with in terms of, marketing and content?
Content. Um, I'm wondering if I have any good, like, well, for us, I can talk most expertly about what we're doing. So I
Hmm.
can say for what we're doing with our marketing, we've been creating some landing pages around some specific things that we want to sell.
Yeah.
And so I would say that's the biggest thing we've been doing so far. So it's
Okay.
I want to talk about like naming, for example. So
Hmm.
we create a landing page for naming because naming is something that we can scale with pretty easily. So that's we maybe if we're pushing naming, I have a landing page, and then maybe I have a couple pieces of longer form content where I'm talking about specific industries and naming trends in that industry or the intersection of AI and naming or whatever. And then also we'll have ads oriented around that. So we're kind of creating these clusters of content that all are pushing people back to landing pages that hopefully, get people to sign up for, a conversation. It's
Yeah,
ultimately.
no, that's great. So are you guys doing that content mostly in blog form, or is this on social?
Yeah, it's a mix mostly. So what we're finding on, and I don't think this is probably a secret either, like on LinkedIn, for example, it seems like what we're hearing is right now their content that keeps you on LinkedIn does a little better right now rather
Yep.
rather than content that sends you off somewhere else.
Yep.
And so like we did a Bullhorn video, and posting little bits of that video have done really well because it's all something you can watch on the platform. So it is a bit of a mix of like native content to that platform, and then also posting content to our site that then we repost elsewhere. And we also do an email newsletter.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is now we're really getting into our, our Venn diagram. So
Yep.
one of our big, a brand of our agency is called We Build Newsletters. So obviously we're very bullish, no pun intended, on the power of newsletters. So
Yeah.
so how's that work for you? What kind of content are you guys putting out in the newsletter? Have you been doing it for a while? I'm curious about that.
We've been doing it for a while, and we're kind of in a reimagining period.
Mhm.
A lot of the past, it's been more of a digest of like, here are some
Mhm.
of the case studies you might have missed, or here are 3 blog posts about X, Y, and Z. We're starting to transition a bit to where it's more a standalone thing. And I'm trying to have a little more fun with it. Like, you kind of get so serious about everything, and people kind of want to hear differentiation and like, what does your voice sound like? So I
Mhm.
just put one out about how to speak designer in 4 easy blog posts. And
Mhm.
I really like give our designers a hard time. And so I like basically the roast is sort of the blog or the newsletter rather is sort of a long form roast of our designers. And thankfully they put up with it pretty well.
I love that. And this you're so right. One of the big challenges we have is like how do we and because all of our clients, I mean, they're in some of them are in really dry industries, right? Financial services, legal, that kind of stuff. So it's like how can we communicate with our audience in a way that doesn't just sound like an article that somebody can find on Google, right? Or it's like an academic piece. And so, yeah, I mean, it's how we've got to figure out our job is to like pull that personality out, which sometimes is super simple. And one of the things we've kind of fallen back on is we just turn the camera on and we start talking and we get them to tell us about what they're doing. And a lot of times that really pulls out, a nugget that we can then use
Mm.
to create some content about. We do this for ourselves, right? This podcast becomes the inspiration for most of our newsletter content because I mean, you and I, again, we're two kind of old pros talking shop. There's stuff that you and I are going to discuss that's going to come out of a conversation
Yeah.
that's so difficult for me if I'm like standing in front of my whiteboard of like what topic should I write about, right? Or even doing, keyword research, which if I never see another like SEM rush dashboard, trying to break down what's the keyword opportunity, I'll be totally fine with that, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's all about kind of finding that personality and yeah, having some fun with it because this is part of the job, right? This is part of the job in growing a business is putting out content. And if you hate doing it, you won't do it. That's what I've found to be true time and again. So,
Yeah. And I think when people think about working with a creative agency, they think of like, oh, it should be fun and quirky and interesting and
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
And so it's like why should we feel like our material needs to be like academic and boring?
right.
Again, like if I were a wealth manager, I would probably think about it differently because if
Mhm.
you think about a wealth manager, you don't want some like wild person. You probably
Yeah,
want some like I don't know what you want, but um
yeah. Yeah, you're not wearing the yellow suit like the guy from the Savannah Bananas, right?
right.
If you don't know, Brad, if you don't know about the Savannah Bananas, we're about to change this whole subject of the conversation to talk about that. But you're not going to be the yellow suit guy if you're building brand for a wealth management firm, but that may be appropriate in a more creative pursuit. So you got to find. That sounds like a cool thing. You got to find your own yellow suit.
Find your yellow suit.
Note for
That's
later,
your new
who's listening?
What's your
Yeah.
new book right there? Find
That's
your
right.
yellow
Yeah.
suit. People
Find your
cows thing.
yellow. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
The Savannah Bananas, those guys have
Yeah.
blown up. Yeah, we're gonna have a whole, and I think this makes me want to also bring this back to, kind of full circle to you guys. And you clearly have a super niche, in my opinion, a super niche kind of corner of the market. Your brand strategy, but focused on naming. Well, I assume you applied these same principles to Bullhorn. So can you tell us about like the process you went through and why you came to that name? Because I think that's, I can see where like, I can see it, I can see the angle that you're taking, but I'm curious about your thought process in getting there.
Yeah. When I said like it doesn't just come to you, Bullhorn's sort of the exception. That's like the lie that proves the point. Like literally, we were think. Well, first off, Bullhorn is the first business I ever named. Before I even knew that naming was like something you could do professionally. And so, like, would I call it that again today? No, but it is what it is. It's like it gets to the point like when you think about should I do a rename? Like we had a discussion about a year ago. Should we rename our agency? And it's it's not obvious that it's causing barriers to business growth today. And so
Hmm.
then the answer is probably no, it's not worth it, which is
Hmm.
to me is probably the main benchmark. Is it a barrier to your growth? Then you should definitely change it and move on. So I was refurbishing my house, and so I didn't have a washer and dryer. So I was at the laundromat with my co-founder, and literally we were like, we have the dry cycle to like come up with a name. And we went through, we filled up a piece of paper, and it's like, well, I hate that one the least, and we went. So it's like, Bullhorn is like the worst piece of advice of how to do it. So I've learned a lot since then.
I don't care. I love hearing founder stories. Like I think there's so many great lessons to be pulled from, uh, you know, going with going with the thing that you hate the least,
Yep.
because building a business is going to be what determines if any of it matters or not, right? Can you build a business? And so you got yourself into naming, and you said this is before you knew that that was like a thing you could do, right? So what got you there?
Yeah, we're again like if you were to give people advice of how to start a business, you would use us as a case study of what not to do. So my business partner and I were both both for I don't even know if he had a college degree at that point, maybe. But like I had never taken a marketing class, never taken a class. I didn't know what QuickBooks was, profit and loss statement, balance. Like I literally knew nothing about business. I had worked at a bicycle shop. Like I knew how to sell bicycles. That's what I knew how to do. And I was putting on a citywide bike festival with a group of people, and he was doing a music festival. And, it was like the summer of 2008. And we were like, man, we should really like try to get together and do something. So that year, that summer, I left my job thinking like, well, I'll probably just get a job at an agency trying to like learn how to like write ad copy to start off with. And then like the economy just tanked and tanked and tanked and
Hmm.
tanked. And so at that point, we became reluctant entrepreneurs because literally neither of us could get other jobs. There were just wasn't anything. So we started off thinking, okay, well, we know a lot about we know about small business, a little about small business. We know a lot about festivals. We'll do like event marketing. Quickly became obvious that everyone wanted our help with event marketing and zero people wanted to pay us to do it. And so we we switched. We started working for small businesses. We said we would do websites. We did events. This one person called us up and she was like, hey, I don't know what Bullhorn is, but our beer vendor just backed out for our festival. Can you guys sell beer? And we were like, sure. And so
Why not?
like
Yeah.
we literally like got a 1 day liquor license and a truck full of beer and sold beer at this festival. I would say like the long story or the short story just is, we kept in mind one is what serves our customers and what are we good at? What then kind of grows the helps grow our business? What can we create a sustainable financial business on? And the last one is what benefits our community. And so over time, we've kind of seen that like what we're good at can shrink considerably. So we thought we were good like general marketers, and then we realized we're not really that good at that. and we're not really good at buying media, and we're not really good at like throwing events. And so we kind of have come down to this really core brand offering of we do naming, brand identity, brand launch. So that's all we do. So it's a kind of like shrink, shrink, shrink over the years,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of knowing when, and luckily for us, you hear that advice a lot is like, growing's about saying no and that kind of thing. And I think it's true, but also it's a luxury of having money. Like early on, when we said
Yeah.
yes to selling beer, it's because like we had no money. When you have no money, you say yes to everything. And then when you have money, you can start to say no to a few things. Um, I do think the important thing also for us is that third one, what benefits our community. We've gotten a lot more ambitious about that. And we just recertified as a B Corp for the second time. So we originally became a B Corp in 2017. And we focus a lot of our marketing on, looking for other like-minded businesses who want to use their business as a force for good, which is the way B Corp movement talks about it. And so that's the kind of orientation we're looking for in kind of the C-suite people when we're looking for partners.
That's really awesome. I think, a couple of key points like for those listening to take note of. So, Brad, I had a similar experience. In the beginning, you kind of got to do what you can get paid to do, right? I mean, that just is that's the fact of starting and growing a business, and we certainly went through that, right? I think in the beginning, I mean, I was building websites, I was writing, ad copy, I was doing content marketing, I was doing social media. I got all this camera equipment because I had to figure out how to use that before. And then over time, we did something similar too. We kind of analyzed what all of our clients were, what we were doing for all of our clients. We looked at we did an 80-20 analysis, right? Of like, what are the few things that we're doing that are having the biggest impact and that our clients are appreciating the most, as silly as that sounds, right? As simplistic as that sounds, it's like, but what are we hearing them tell us? Hey, I really like it, what you guys are doing there, or we really enjoy that process. For us, that was how we kind of culled down our service offerings to something more specific. So I love that almost like you're carving away at the parts of the stone that are not the statue or the sculpture that you're trying to build, right? I think I heard that was, maybe it was, let's say it was Da Vinci, I don't know, but they asked him, how he carved this beautiful sculpture. He said, I just removed all the things that did not look like the final sculpture that I wanted, right? And I thought I really liked that. That sort of word picture, that symbol. So that's really great. So you guys have been around since 2008. I know that was like you and I probably were starting businesses at the worst possible time, which is also one of those great blessings and one of those great opportunities, right? Because I've felt like since then, I'm sure you have, that like, shoot, we made it through then when we had no money and no brand recognition and no customer base and the economy was terrible. Well, whatever challenges we have now, how hard could they possibly be, right? As long as we don't slip into a worldwide depression, I'm pretty sure we can weather the storm, right?
Yep.
So, well, Brad, as like a parting note, I would really like if that one, there were a way that our listeners could learn more about what you guys do. You talked about some of the things in the longer form content that you're putting together that's sort of instructive on, naming and building a brand. Where can people get a hold of that? Where can they find you guys?
Yeah, when I said earlier we're at Bullhorn Creative all over the web, I think that's actually true. So
Yeah.
our URL is bullhorncreative.com, and yeah, there's a blog there that you can read all sorts of different perspectives from our team on topics like ranging from color theory to typography to naming thoughts to brand language, all sorts of things. So there's all sorts of kind of like expert think pieces on various topics. So that's a spot you can definitely look, and we're pretty active on LinkedIn and Instagram. That's probably about it, though.
Love it. Well, we'll make sure to include links to that. If you guys are watching on YouTube, it is down in the description section of this, or all the links that Brad just mentioned. Brad, I really appreciate you coming back on the podcast.
Yeah.
We will we'll make sure that we get to do this again. Hopefully it won't be another 5 years, but we appreciate your time and we wish you guys the very best.
Yeah. Thanks, Reed.